But for this particular presentation, I really wanted something a little bit different, a little bit more spontaneous. And this is going to be highly spontaneous because this is the first time I've ever done an open presentation about this particular topic. So, what has been promoted is what we're going to talk about, and the prepared words that are actually going to come out of my mouth may be slightly different, okay? But over time, we'll be able to sort of blend all that you would like to discuss. So, the ground rules for this evening. Number one, of course, technology, right? We all need to silence our cell phones. It was horribly embarrassing where about 2 years ago I didn't, and my cell phone goes off about 20 minutes into the presentation. That was not good. The second thing is that I'm going to have some introductory remarks. I really have no idea how long it's going to be. We have, what, 90 minutes tonight?
It sounds like we need a microphone.
Okay, we have, what, 90 minutes?
Oh, yes, 90 minutes.
Okay. Okay, we have 90 minutes. You can all hear me okay? Okay, great. And so in that 90 minutes, I'm going to be doing, I'm guessing, somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes of some thoughts that I've put together, after which we will have hopefully an hour, and I'll really try and keep it to that because I know the real benefit and value of these sorts of settings or forums is really open dialogue, question and answer, conversation, opinions. All opinions are welcome. And we can tailor that really in two ways. One is, at first, comments, questions, different opinions about the topic at hand, and then secondly, really about child development and children related to child development. So, with that in mind, you're all familiar with Danica's, of course. They made it out to Walnut Creek. I cannot hold the microphone for this, so I will speak louder. In my hands, we have 2 cookies. One of them is a healthy cookie. That would be the oatmeal raisin cookie. One of them is an unhealthy cookie. Heretofore tonight will be arbitrarily designated as the snickerdoodle. My daughter was very upset with me because she loves snickerdoodles. Both cookies are yummy. Both of them smell good, taste good. We want to be able to eat from both of them. And yet the decisions around healthy and unhealthy need to be thought of before we bite into either. Not only that, but just to complicate it a little bit, how much of the unhealthy can we eat? And can we be eating too much of the healthy? So with that in mind, as I put these 2 yummy cookies over here, I'm not going to have you hold them. We're going to talk about technology and electronics, but in particular, a topic that has become actually very important to me professionally, and that is about video gaming and about aggression associated with video gaming. Of the people, parents here in the audience tonight, how many of you do not have a child with special needs? I don't even like to say it that way, but okay. Well, I'm so glad you're here because you guys have accomplished the notion of integration and community right now. So this is fabulous. So for the moment, we're going to talk about the experience of video gaming, not from a neurotypical, a neuroatypical. The correct PC term, by the way, internationally is diverse ability, because we all have diverse abilities, which I just find really appealing. So anyway, so really, over the past 30 years, in my professional experience as a pediatrician, and more specifically as a developmental behavioral pediatrician, I really have been witness to several shifts that have occurred. Over the years, as video games has come into being, What have I observed within the children and families that I've seen? Increased time, of course, in children playing video games. Less time in children playing non-video games. And of just personal concern to me is the intrusion of play thought from video gaming. So for example, many years ago I saw a child and had this lovely little toy castle. And the child setting the toy castle up. And he's setting the toy castle up exactly as Super Mario would have the toy castle set it up. And then when I tried to sort of change the scenario a little bit, I was breaking the rules. Because that's not how you play the game. And that was, kind of eye-opening to me. Younger and younger ages of children being exposed to and playing video games. And you could throw technology into this. We'll talk a little bit about media in general. I do have concerns about thematic or developmentally thematic exposures. I wanted to say developmentally appropriate and inappropriate, and then I know that the voice of my wife inside of me would say, don't be judgmental. Really, you all need to be the ones to interpret what is developmentally appropriate or inappropriate for your child, but I'll try and do it from the metaphor again of the healthy versus unhealthy cookie. What else have I observed? Certainly an increase in aggressive exposures in terms of violence and aggression within the video games. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And as that has influenced the types of concerns that parents raise, that schools raise, and that I've observed with children. They spend more time on video games. They spend less time on non-video games, on playing, on peer-to-peer communication outside of an electronic format. More time on video games. This may not apply to anybody in here, but less time with the family. More time on video games, less time on homework. More times on video games, less time on sleep. You get the trend. And so over the past 30 years, not only me, but the American Academy of Pediatrics and other child professional organizations have really come to look at this, and it's not only video gaming, but the whole media story as well. It's really a public health concern. So this has moved beyond from just an issue of play to one that really does affect public health. And this raises concerns for me. So I appreciate the invitation to be able to share some about this and then to really open it up more so in comments. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we can learn about what's out there in terms of information. How the heck with the stand? About video games. So I will email Regina the name of this later. I came with a good friend of mine, Pete Caldwell, who's the executive director of We Care Children's Services, which is an early intervention program in Contra Costa County. And Pete was gracious enough to drive because I was still writing my notes as we were slamming down 680 coming here. So I don't have everything in perfect format. But some of the information I'm going to present now comes from the Kaiser Family Foundation research that was done. It's called Generation M2, Media Influences of 8 to 18-year-old Children. Yes?
So the Special Needs Committee, we will put the information that Dr. Berman has along with a copy of the article. That will all be on our website. So we can actually send an email to everybody who signed up for Eventbrite and let you know that it's on the website, so just so you know that the information will be there.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. So what they did was, this is the third time they've done these 2-year studies. So they've done it in 3 different cohorts. They looked at viewing habits of all media for children ages 8 to 18. They did it in 1999, 2004. This most recent cohort was in 2009 that's been published. And a few things to pay attention to. I'm only going to hit the high points, obviously, and then you can look it up. It's a mere 88-page document, which is why. And it goes as follows. The total media exposure, which includes television, cell phone, computer, music, print, film, has increased substantially over time. So total media exposure, again, 18 to 18-year-olds in 1999 was 7.29 hours per day. In 2009, it was 10.5 hours per day. Other than sleeping, it was the singularly longest strongest activity that children were participating in throughout their days. Now, the actual individual media use, this is fascinating to me, was 7.5 hours. So what's the 10.5 hour number represent? Multitasking. So 30% of the children of that 10.5 hour group were not only looking at video games, but they were listening to music, doing texting simultaneously, and Lord knows, hopefully not studying at that point in time. But think of it, 10 hours a day of exposure to the media. Now, over the course from 2004 to 2009, what has increased the amount of time spent with music and audio, television, computers, and video games. Interestingly, movie viewing hasn't changed at all in 5 years, but what has declined is attention to print. Print is declining, both potentially positively, the healthy cookie, and perhaps not so positively, the unhealthy cookie, and that's something we could all talk about later. It's a raging debate in the field of education and in journalism. A couple of other things that we've learned that this study reports. So not only has the overall amount of time of spending on video gaming and media expanded, but what are the impact? And so they looked at a couple of features. One was academics as measured in grades, and the other was some emotional factors in terms of how they get along with families and a concept called contentment, and I'll define that in a moment. When it came to grades, it turns out that they had 3 comparison groups: heavy users, moderate users, and light users, sort of like the Goldilocks story, right? Heavy users were defined, this was mind-boggling, 16 hours of media content in a typical day. Now remember, some of that is multitasking, okay? But 16 hours a day, that accounted for 21% of all 8 to 18-year-olds. Whatever the content may be, that's a pretty large cookie. And then there were moderate users, which were 3 to 16 hours per day, and light users, which were less than 3 hours a day. And by, hopefully you can begin to get a sense of what this story looks like. So it turns out that heavy users had the lowest rate, percentage-wise, of what they call good grades, defined arbitrarily as A's and B's, 51%, as compared to moderate and light users, which were 65%. The other way of looking at it is that the highest percentage group of children, 8 to 18, with fair or poor grades, C's or below, was in the heavy user group. The higher the amount of time on media, the greater it seemed to be, at least in a general sense, the impact on academics. Now, the second thing we were going to talk about, and this is again from the study, is they looked at emotional factors. So they looked at 2 things. There's a measure called contentment, and they defined contentment by a series of questions that the children answered. The questions, if I turn the page, are: I have a lot of friends, I get along with my parents, I've been happy at school, or I'm bored, I feel sad and unhappy, or I get into trouble a lot. So, forget the stand. It turns out, this is when the slides work, it turns out that the heavy media use had the lowest rate of feeling content. The other way of looking at it is that the light users had the lowest rate of feeling discontent and feeling more content. Does that make sense? The higher the amount of video gaming, just based on hours, they didn't look into content, the greater the potential emotional impact in a not favorable way. Then what they did was they looked specifically at a few of those questions. So, having a lot of friends. Turns out, irrespective of the amount of time you were video gaming, or on media, or combined, or multitasking, everybody had friends. But, interestingly, getting along well with their parents. 90% of the children that were moderate or light users rated themselves as getting along well with their parents, but only 84%. As you may say, that's not that big a difference. Well, statistically, that turns out to be a significant difference. Being happy at school, about 82% for moderate and light users, only 72% for heavy users. Getting into trouble a lot, 21% for moderate users, 33% for heavy heavy users. So what does this say? And we can talk more about that as we go through this. But there seemed to be a trend, not so favorably, in the unhealthy cookie direction for increasing amounts of time on electronic media, and certainly less time on print media. So what kind of games were being played? Well, in this particular survey, and I have to accept, for those of you who know me, kids always walk in, and after they've gotten to know me, they know my shtick really fast, which is, I know Dr. B, you don't like to play video games. So I am here to say Dr. B does not play video games. That is not to say I never, ever did. I did save the universe playing Galaga many years ago when you would put the quarter into the machine. Remember that? And Pong, but as in the article. But no, I don't play video games. So have I played Guitar Hero? Probably not. Have I played Grand Theft Auto? Absolutely not. But have I watched teens play these? Yes, I have. So in this particular survey, it turned out that the highest percentage of games played was Guitar Hero and Rock Bands, which would be considered neutral or pro-social games. Super Mario, which I professionally and personally have some real concerns about, was 65%, Wii Sports 64%, and then Grand Theft Auto and Halo made up the rest, with Madden NFL at 47%. That's a whole nother topic about the health and wellness of professional sports, the lives of our children. I will not get into that. But as I also referenced in the article that you have, in 2015, I looked at the video game industry website. They're industry leaders, and they collect information about this. And a couple of things to note. One, in 2015, there were 155 million Americans playing video games. That's just Americans, 155 million. 20%, or 40 million of them, were below the age of 18. Everybody else over the age 18. Of the 10 best-selling games, and this is an industry that in 2015 was about a $24 billion industry, just in games and consoles and items associated with them. 50% of the 10 best-selling titles were violence-themed. Of the next 50%, there were at least aggressive interactions in all of them. Does football involve an aggressive interaction? Yes, football involves an aggressive interaction. I'm not saying that it's a healthy or unhealthy cookie. That's for you to decide. Is it an aggressive interaction? Yes. Let's talk about Mario for a minute. How many of us are familiar with Mario and Super Mario, right? Over the years, what I have observed is that Super Mario and the themes have gotten increasingly aggressive. They use the way they deal with problem solving and conflict resolution is through fireballs, is through stomping on things, is through breaking. Is that an aggressive themed game? Professionally, from my viewpoint, yes. Again, I'm not putting it in the category of healthy or unhealthy cooking, but it is not an entirely neutral experience. This is just sort of what the video game industry tried to report. Then we talked about, now this was the most interesting and astounding piece of factual information from this Kaiser family study. Rules. Everybody here tonight has rules about their children playing video games, right? Absolutely. Well, it turned out from this survey that when they asked the children, now it's possible that the answers they got from the children are not the same as the way that the parents would have answered it. But 30% of the children, only 30% of the children, said that there were rules about which video games they could play. That's an astoundingly low percentage. That was pretty alarming to me. And then how much time can they play on video games? Only 30%. In other words, only 30% of the group felt that their parents gave them rules. Higher percentages when the children were younger, understandably. Lower percentages as the children get older. But all told, 30%. That seems a little low to me. This is the data that they got. Interestingly, it turns out that they had more rules that they perceived about what they should be doing or watching on the computer than the video games they should play. So from my standpoint, that's fantastic that the parents were setting rules about the computer, and probably we need to shore up that other piece of it, at least for the children on understand us in terms of the games that they are playing, exposed to, the amount of time, and so on. So this is information that came from the Kaiser Family Foundation, and they coined a term which I think is really nice called a media environment. So as we approach this now with children, we are in this world. I mean, none of this is going to go away, and it's not going to change per se. But to look at it as a media environment, everything from video games to what they learn, to what they read, to what they're exposed to, music, and so on. Okay. That would be my phone and text. See? Media environment. Oh, yes, and smartphones are absolutely, so this is my clever way to look and see who texted me. But this is all part of this as well. We'll talk a little bit about that more. So, what are the more common experiences then, and why would Dr. B even be interested in talking about this? And that has to do with several factors, only of which I'm going to talk about in sort of the prepared presentation. The rest we can dialogue and open question and answer and comments. And the first is, I will ask you to take it on faith, but actually never take anything on faith from anybody, right? But it's pretty well documented now that there's a relationship between exposure to media violence, prolonged exposure to media violence, and increases in youth aggressive thoughts, aggressive behavior, and aggressive emotions. Now, I'm not suggesting, I'm truly not suggesting that it may be with any single child here or in the universe. That's a very difficult claim to make. That's what's called a causative relationship, that if you play this game, you will therefore become. Nobody can say that. But as a group, are there associations? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes. Increase in aggressive thoughts, behaviors, and so on. So how come? How come this would be? So there's lots of reasons why. Overexposure, over repetition. My gosh, sometimes I joke in the office, but it's really not a joke. If our children spend as much time learning Pythagorean theorem as they did learning how to master the latest level of Minecraft, they'd be soaring through geometry, right? So there's a learned effect. And make no mistake about this, the video game designers are just excellent at behavior theory and education learning theory in terms of immediacy of reinforcement, of knowing exactly what you're doing, whether you're successful or not, and how to reset and start again. So there's a learned effect. Well, there's a learned effect, and children and grown-ups are really effective at a particular skill in video games. Well, that also plays a role in terms of this notion of aggressive thoughts and behavior. And this comes out through a theory, and I'll try and go through this, because I've said it to myself many times, but it's never come out of my mouth yet. And that's called the general aggression model. The general aggression model theorizes that repeated exposures to media violence can lead to the development of aggressive beliefs and attitudes, aggressive behavioral scripts, or behavioral thinking, and then desensitization to violence. Again, I will have this conversation in the office, I will have it in the grocery store, I will have it at a dinner party, and people will say, I've never seen that in my child, and my answer is hopefully not. Hopefully they've been able to eat most of the healthy cookie, only a little bit of the unhealthy cookie. But as a group, there really does seem to be a trend in this manner. So it's to the first two that I'd like to begin the introductory remarks. That repeated exposures to media violence can lead to the development of aggressive beliefs and attitudes and aggressive behavioral scripts. So this comes to a concept called hostile attribution bias. Hostile attribution bias is the notion that if I am playing aggressive and violent themed games over and over and over and over again, so that slowly over a period of time, that influences my way of thinking, of expectation, and of conflict or problem-solving resolution, that's going to influence the way in which I respond in a non-video game situation. So I'll make up an example, which is, you know, two seventh graders walking in the hallway, and of course it's just controlled chaos. And one of them accidentally bumps into another, where the child might either shrug it off or sneer. But the hostile attribution bias theory would suggest that the child who was bumped into takes it as a direct aggressive assault, and therefore has a behavioral response, which is also aggressive. 8, misinterpretation based on the notion of aggressive learning through repeated exposures to video games. Does that make sense? You may or may not agree, but that makes sense. Did I explain that okay? Okay. So that you misinterpret others' behaviors as more aggressive. I can tell you clinically, I've absolutely seen it in terms of the way that children respond to teachers. You know, in middle school, when you're on Jeopardy and you've got the question for $1,000, the answer is it's the teacher's fault. In middle school, it is always the teacher's fault, 100% of the time. It's a bad teacher. I didn't realize you were so expert at, you know, knowing how to teach. But what's happened is that children are starting to take it as she's got it out for me, or he did this to me on purpose, or he doesn't like me, or even worse. And that's just a simple example. Now, can I link that directly to video game playing? No. But as a cultural shift over time, as a developmental cultural shift over time, yeah, I really am concerned about this. All right, so this is also further complicated then. So if this notion of hostile attribution bias, or the misinterpretation of what is essentially a neutral or slightly offensive act is one that is openly aggressive, then the behavioral script says, I gotta fight back. So here's the Super Mario problem. Now I have to throw a fireball. Okay, so when you break down Mario, it's actually about aggressive conflict resolution, aggressive problem solving, not the entire game, and there's rainbows and stars and clouds. But I mean, think about it, I really am microanalyzing it because it has to be microanalyzed. So part of this is a behavioral script that says if somebody's going to attack me, I misinterpret the notion of attack. So if somebody's going to attack me, I got to defend myself and attack them back. And there are increasing rates of aggressive behaviors being seen, not only in middle schools and high schools, but this is trickling down to preschool. Okay, so let's come back then to the notion of desensitization to violence. How many of you heard about desensitization to violence? Right. How many of you believe in desensitization to violence? Less hands. That's good. Good. Okay. And I am not here to sell the point per se, but to present the information to you so you can try and seek this out further and make the decisions that you feel. So, desensitization to violence in research has been shown to result in increased rates of aggressive behavior, particularly in adolescence, increase in both bullying and being bullied, and significant and real concerns, and this one's particularly problematic, is that the desensitization to violence has been shown to desensitize children and adolescents to the failure, and I'm quoting from an article, to the failure to recognize the plight of victims and thus failure to help them in their need. In other words, to have decreased empathy and decreased pro-social behaviors in school. That's stepping in front of somebody to help somebody when they're being bullied. Okay? That seems to be associated, not causative, but associated with the amount and the themes of video and media aggression that children are being exposed to. And again, part of this is repeated over and over and over again. I should also add a couple of other things. One, everybody says this is sex stereotypes, so that boys are at more risk. And it turns out that, yes, boys are at a little bit more risk because we're more aggressive, but it turns out not quite so much. And this effect is being observed in girls nearly as much as it is in boys. The second is to the degree to which a child has already experienced some type of traumatic or post-traumatic experience that is violent or aggressive, they are at higher risk for responding with this aggressive attribution bias, okay? So there are certain children that are more at risk than others. Hopefully nobody in this room's family is at risk. That there are ways to sample a little bit of the unhealthy cookie without really having a significant impact. Oh yeah, one other thing that I need to focus on about video gaming. Now I'm thinking about it as a pediatrician as well as developmental pediatrician, which is what are children not doing if they're spending time on video games, right? Well, they're not getting outdoors, and there is an increasing evidence base of an association between well-being, emotional satisfaction, happiness, improved attention span by being outdoors, even by seeing a green space. There's intriguing research about just having green space paintings in offices as making a difference in terms of the moods of the employees. In terms of levels of physical activity, there's a pretty direct relationship between the amount of time on video gaming and the decreased amount of time in physical activity and meaningful physical activity. And with all due respect, this has been researched. Unless you are getting a good aerobic cardio workout from it doesn't count. It just doesn't count from a physical activity standpoint. Children are having less time in face-to-face peer groups, both structured and unstructured. Now, there's a huge societal issue associated with that, which is beyond our ability to sort of tackle tonight. But in fact, that is happening. Decreased time outdoors, decreased healthy dietary habits. The correlation, the statistical correlation between elevations of obesity and amount of time on a computer is stronger than the correlation between secondhand smoking and lung cancer. So there's increasing rates of obesity for an increasing amount of time spent on a computer. That's not video game alone. That's just sedentary computer and video activities. And then, of course, because the brain survives on sugar, on glucose, it tells us we're hungry for something, and then there are some studies showing dietary shifts in terms of certain types of food that children and adolescents are eating more, and it's high-fat, quick carb types of food. So it's sort of a double whammy in that case. These are healthy cookies, relatively speaking, by the way. Decreased family time. Now I hear this and see this in my office, really, unfortunately, quite frequently. The longer the amount of time on video gaming, the greater the risk of decreased positive or even just neutral family time. Decreased time for learning, reading, and self-exploration. I reference a book by an author, Sherry Turkle. It came out not too long ago called Reclaiming Conversations, Conversations Within the Digital Age. And the reference is in the article. And she really talks about something about boredom. So I was on BARD about 4 years ago, and I don't commute on BARD that much. And I, was looking. I'm not being critical, but I'm looking, and essentially, I would say about 87%, 85% of people are looking down at their cell phones. And it occurred to me, oh my gosh, how are people going to learn how to be bored? And how are we going to learn how to take care of ourselves when we're bored? So typically, I second-guess myself about 100 times over, had several conversations and reading about it. Well, it turns out that boredom is a rather important time for expansive brain creativity, brain thought, the opportunity to try out hypotheses, to consolidate, to take in stuff you've been learning or listening to, things that you were exposed to, an opportunity to let that percolate through. Remember in Harry Potter, Dumbledore takes out the wand and pulls out some of the thoughts. Who of us wouldn't love to have that? Well, that's part of what being bored is. It affords that time for what I would call neurologic restitution. And I really do think that this current generation of younger kids really has difficulty with knowing how to be bored. At a very practical level, of course, it means that they're going to drive us as parents crazy, right? And you know, sometimes things are a means to an end. And again, it's sometimes the unhealthy cookie can serve more value than the healthy cookie in small doses. You know, I understand. But, in fact, there is less time for being bored and for creative thinking. And then, of course, as we talked about before, the more time spent on gaming, the less the time spent on academics and declining grades. All right. I'm going to also mention another article which I will send you the reference for. And it's called The Protective Effects of Parental Monitoring of Children's Media Use, a prospective study. So a study that they actually did an intervention. And I'll send Regina by email this reference. So how do we figure out how to take small doses of this cookie, the unhealthy cookie, and transfer it more into being a healthy cookie? Because I have tried, and I haven't been able to personally and professionally slow down the video game industry. Somehow, I don't think that's going to happen. And, you know, again, we can talk in open about what's positive about it. I'm purposely not right now, but we welcome that opportunity to talk about it. But there are several things that as parents we can do, okay? One, monitoring of media exposure by time, content, theme. So there are a couple of strategies that are mentioned in this article that summarizes it really in a lovely way. Two specific parenting strategies. One is called restrictive monitoring. We all know about restrictive monitoring, right? You can't play that long. You only get 20 minutes now. I'm going to throw out the console. I got to tell you guys as an aside, the only thing that works if it gets that bad is to put a timer on the fuse box. That works. But restricting the amount and the content. The second is what's called, and that's useful to a degree, and you need to do that, or it's suggested to do that. The other is what's called active mediation. This is much more active. It means being with your child in that experience, co-viewing the game, co-viewing the show, discussing what are the elements of this game that are particularly appealing. What are the elements that may not be so appealing? Gosh, what if you were in a situation and you were walking down the street, and I'm talking about this to a 5-year-old, and somebody bumps into you? What are you going to do? I'm going to kick his head off. And just how realistically. So you go on and on and on. I had a conversation with a 14-year-old on Monday in the office who plays Black Ops. I can't even understand the subtext. Black Ops whatever, right? Or Call of Duty, Black Ops 7, 6, I don't know. And so we were talking about it, and I said, what's the mission? And he goes, to kill the other guys. Great. Who set up the mission? I don't know. They just say it in the game. Well, first of all, how do you know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? And I'm being very black and white here. Well, we're the good guys because we're the guys killing the bad guys. Really? And do we know why you're killing the bad guys? You know, so you go on and on and on. No clue, no presentation. Now, there may be games out there that do this better that I'm unaware of, but this is the types of dialogues that you can have with your children. My daughter was an adolescent, about 15. Many of you remember the show Gossip Girl? Yeah, Gossip Girl, which was, you know, about very typical teens in a very typical private high school in Manhattan, in which everybody's sleeping with everybody. And it was sort of like a variation on light pornography. And all her friends are watching it. My wife said, this is on you. So I watched 2 years of episodes with her. 2 years. And 2 things happened. One, I just couldn't shut up. I was just constantly making comments. And secondly, she stopped. Because it just got absurd. And we talked about it. And we would say, well, you know, so we would have actually realistic conversations, maybe not in the moment, but later. That's what they call active mediation. So active mediation really helps to support restrictive monitoring. So if you're going to cut back, or going to set a defined limit, which your child's not going to like, that's a given. Actively dialoguing with them and being part of the experience can help begin to flesh that out. Very powerful. So in this study, it turns out that it helped to improve 4 variables that they were looking at. Sleep improved. School performance measured by increase in grades. This was, I think, a 7-month trial. Increase in pro-social behavior and decrease in aggressive behavior. Through just those 2 things alone. Now, it's not just 2 things. Those are very powerful and they're not always easy, as we all know. What are some other things that us can do? Select pro-social or neutral media experiences. And that doesn't always mean watching the Hallmark show. And sometimes watching nature can be pretty aggressive, right? When the shark is ripping a seal apart. But then you have to talk about it. So exposing them to other than just overtly negative or aggressive experiences, encouraging nonviolent approaches to problem solving. Now, I am not here, nor should any single professional be here to suggest to you what that should be, because that's based on your own family values, your own upbringing, your own ethos, your own culture, your own religion, life experience, and so on. But every one of those will have nonviolent or creative problem-solving approaches. Providing and encouraging empathy-building experiences. And empathy-building experiences are everything from being the buddy of a child with a diverse ability who can't get around by themselves physically so well. I've seen that hundreds of times. To volunteering and, working within some community-based program in terms of working with supporting what they call positive conflict resolution in schools and so on. So you can talk with schools about this as well. Turning off electronic media during meals, family time, and social experiences. Turning electronic media off. What makes this, hands down, the most complicated and the greatest slippery slope is this. Have I violated this rule before? Yes. It turns out, and I read this, that adolescents have a rule of 3. They've done microanalysis through videotaping of adolescents communicating while they're in a group. And at any given time, 2 of the 3 will be on their cell phones. They'll either be talking, texting, Facebooking, Instagramming, Twittering, or whatever, and one of them will pop their head up and remind me of meerkats. And then that one will go down, and automatically one of them pops their head up. But the point being that and this is the book by Sherry Turkle, she really talks about this in her book, it's really wonderful in that way, alarming, is it really does interfere with emotion sharing, with reading signals and cues, with paying attention to the conversation as well as for the recipient. Okay? So learning how to turn that off. Remove or control electronics in the bedroom. The vast majority of U.S. households, and frankly the vast majority of most countries on earth, have electronics in the bedroom, television in the bedroom. It's the #1 cause of insomnia in the world. The second, of course, is the cell phone in the room. And question and answer we can talk about in my own observations of that. But that, too, would have significant impact in terms of the reduction on the continued exposure to the violent themes, that repetitive learning. It would also have the opportunity for a reduction in the conflicts that your children are going to get into, which gets into the whole notion of sneaking and truth telling. And then finally, getting outdoors. Just getting your kids outdoors. That is easier said than done. I'm very, very appreciative of that. And yet, there are ways to try and, either alone or within small groups, within programs, create your own program. And I'm not just speaking about the Boy or Girl Scouts or sports. It's getting outdoors more. We live in an area that has the largest protected open space for an urban area in the country. There's nowhere that has more open space than the Bay Area. Okay. In conclusion, you realize I'm moving fast. I think we can all come to some agreement that there are healthy cookies in life and there are unhealthy cookies in life. Now, each of us may interpret for ourselves why we think this is healthy or why we think this is not so unhealthy. That's for you to decide. The whole idea is to learn, take in more, pay attention to this more, dialogue with your child more. And remember, it's great to eat a healthy cookie. But you can eat too much of a healthy cookie. You'll notice I'm avoiding the snickerdoodle. That's for anybody who wants it. So, as I say in the article, it's really to encourage you as parents, us as professionals, and we as a community to really pay attention, to be active in this portion of the lives of our child. Because at 10 to 12 hours a day, they will be spending far more time on this than they will be in school or with us. And I think it's just a great opportunity for us to really spend more time with them and help guide them, as I think all of us would want to from a safe point of view. So with that in mind, as I finish the rest of my cookie, thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome all thoughts, opportunities, and comments. So thank you.
So I'm going to grab a microphone, and if you want to raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone over if you have a question for Dr. Berman.
And if anybody wants the snickerdoodle, just come on out. Or we can pass it around here. Pass the snickerdoodle around.
I figure out how to turn this on.
Or just stand up and shout.
Yeah, you talked about games with aggressive teams.
And I'll repeat the question.
Is it fairly obvious in identifying what these games are that have to do? You talked about Super Mario, where
Right.
these things are kicking in, and if it's not fairly obvious how to do that,
Right.
identify these games, are there resources?
That's a great question. So the question is, how do you really paraphrase? How do you really identify what's aggressive, less aggressive, not aggressive? And it's a little bit like that old Supreme Court definition of pornography. You'll know it when you see it. So there are clearly games that are aggressive that we all can, I think, 100% agree with. It's that middle ground, that slippery slope. So Minecraft. When Minecraft came out, it had nothing related to destroying. And Minecraft now has, and you guys will know this better than I do, some things that like break down things or destroy other things now. So now all of a sudden destruction's coming into Minecraft. It was a marvelously addicting but constructive problem-solving game, and now suddenly it's beginning to morph a little bit further into that whole notion. So is Minecraft aggressive? I'm probably the only person in the room that would say yes to some degree. So there are websites that I gave to Regina that you should have that are parent-driven websites, right?
We'll post those on the website also.
Right.
It's already on the website.
Oh, it is?
Okay, great. And so there's some really good ones, and one of them, and I can't remember which one actually is sort of a master website, and it's linked to 6 other ones. The one thing that I will tell you, perhaps not surprisingly, is that the ratings come from the game manufacturers. And there's at least a 20, I think the last time I saw this, a 23% difference of opinion when the video makers rate something and when independent parent groups rate it. So it's just, don't pay attention to the label. You've got to look at this stuff with your child, so thank you for that. Yeah, other questions, thoughts, please?
I have the mic working, so.
Oh, great. Okay, back there now.
Can I just comment on that? I know there is a website that I refer to, which is for, it's like a parents review on movies and games and stuff. And so, that's another thing. I don't have it remembered in my head what it is.
I do have a couple of names here, and that may be one of them. One is commonsensemedia.org. Is that it?
What?
commonsensemedia.org.
I think that is it.
Another is esrb.org, esrb.org, and I think that's the master website one. And another one, which is put out by the government, is onguardonline.gov. onguardonline.gov. Linda?
Another site I like is Kids in Mind.
Use the microphone, please.
Kids
another good website?
Great. Kids in Mind. Is that .org? Probably. .com? Okay, great. Kidsinmind.com. And, not only will you read these, but I think it's good if your child can, if they're 5, it's not going to matter so much, but when they're about 7 and above, you can have your child read along with you and read it. So it's not just you are making this up. There is really another body out there that is suggesting this or interpreting this. Now, sir, please.
So I don't have a problem limiting my kids from video games. The problem is taking it away when time's up.
Right.
Do you have any tips on, like,
Well, so here's what I'm going to do, because we've crossed this bridge once or 1,000 times. I'm going to lay out the neurologic problem here, and I want to hear the tips that everybody has, because we're all in the same muck on this one. It's a great question. So, I truly believe neurologically there's something unique to the interface between the human brain and the electronic screen that's different than anything we've ever experienced before. Now, I sound very much like my grandfather, okay? So there was an article that I read, and the first part of the article is, this is going to pollute the minds of children, it is going to create sin in our country, and it's going to bring us down, blah, 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 blah. It was all about radio. And it was written like in the early 1900s, okay? And then the same thing about television. I grew up in the television era and so on. But there's something really unique in a neurologic catchway. And we all experience this, right? About 100% of us get on screens. And at some point in time, when it's time to get off, either because you have to or because your child wants you to or your spouse reminds you to, you sort of get that irritable little sort of, none of you get it, I do, for just a moment. That's neurological. Okay? So children at all ages have difficulty disengaging from this intense, neurologic, neurochemical, dopamine-driven, constantly reward-seeking and reinforcing experience. And you can't just turn that off because it's like suddenly cutting the juice inside their neurology. And it's coming out of, you've got 5 minutes, you've got 2 minutes, and you got to do that, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that's why they get irritable, and the one sort of recommendation that I almost always blanketly suggest is however you're going to do it, and I want to hear tips from you, the next step for a parent is to beat a hasty retreat. Get out the door as fast as you can, because just about anything that's going to come out of your child's mouth isn't going to go down well. They really don't mean it. It's that switch, and they need time to change. And so that type of conflict goes nowhere. It's a very destructive, not very promoting conflict, because that's really neurologic. Now, tips. Come on, guys. What's worked?
Automatic shut off.
Automatic timer.
Yeah, and then I'm not the bad guy.
Right. So is there a warning to the child?
I think so.
Yeah. Good. Great. Yeah, please.
So we just pick the days, like days where they have to do homework and other things, we just don't do video games.
Right.
Weekends, let them do it, or just like.
Now, did you, so certain days of the week, now did you always have it that way from the beginning?
We did it because of some consequences, that the child was not able to, like saying not able to stop and come out
Right.
with that. So we said, okay, these 4 days you don't do anything, these 3 days we can have 1 hour or whatever.
Okay. All right. So that's another one. Yeah.
We've done the countdown, and they know it's like, okay, I'm counting to 10, if I get to 10, tomorrow you have no screen time. And they've learned, and you gotta stand by it, which is the hard thing to do, but they get that if they keep going over, they're gonna way lose the next day or the next day or at their next opportunity. And we also try to your point, once they get off of there, go outside and run around for 5 minutes. Go do something else, because we don't ever try to go from screen time to something we really need them to be engaged in, because we know it's not gonna work. You're setting yourself up for just conflict. So they've got to shake it off. We'll tell them, go shake it off. You need to shake this off and have that.
I will also share with you, since this is sponsored by the Special Needs Committee, is that this becomes even more problematic when children have either attention disorders and or autism spectrum disorders. It makes it even that much harder to do that shift. Other strategies? Please.
I tried this and I didn't stick with it long enough to work so well, but I say to my son,
Yeah, so that part's good. Timers are for adults. Timers are not for children. Timers remind us that we, how often do we say 3 minutes and then you're off and 27 minutes goes by? I mean, we're fallible. I mean, right? So timers are really for us. Because kids are still so engaged in that sort of dopamine-driven zone, they either don't hear it or don't pay attention to it. When they're older, I would say as their brains develop 18 and above, there are several programs available that you can download that'll come up there and it'll remind the person on the screen, you've got 2 minutes, I'm going to shut you off, get back to work, your grades are going, your toilet's overflowing. I mean, they do this. And they're older, and that helps. But not when they're younger, because their brains just aren't developed well enough. Other strategies, please.
Whenever I would tell my kids to get off, they always want more time. And it was always like, no, we're just turning it off, and it was always really abrupt. So what I started doing is telling them to get off a little earlier than what I want them to.
Right.
And then when they ask for more time, say, yeah, 5 more minutes. And they seem to wind down and get off much more easily when I give them that little bit of extra time than when I just cut them off.
What a clever parent, right? The relativity of time. Things aren't always going to work. And we don't, most of us don't get into this parenting role with the notion that we really want to come home every day and punish our children or discipline our children. That's really not what we signed up for. And yet we have to discipline. So sometimes it gets to like Regina says, here's your choice. If you spend 5 more minutes on after this reasonable reminder, reasonable time frame, and I've helped, sometimes you have to shut off the computer, and then then I'm sorry, you've either lost it tomorrow, you've lost 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We've done e-ticket systems where children have certain responsibilities, and they earn e-tickets, like blank movie tickets, they can exchange for the amount of time. If there's argument like one of you suggested, then you lose an e-ticket. You can't do that to me, you've just lost 2 e-tickets. I mean, so it's a matter of how you set it up. There's really no magic answer. What it comes back to, though, within the uniqueness of your child and the situation you're in, is to follow through with it. It's not easy. Other, please?
Oh, I never asked my question, but if you still want ideas.
Yeah.
I don't have ideas.
Oh.
Can I ask my question?
Of course.
So, I always want to be the mom that has the kids over to my house.
Yeah.
However, we have pretty strict screen time stuff, and so I feel like that's hindering the friends coming to our house.
Right.
So, any suggestions?
Oh, I'm so happy you brought that up. Others have experienced this before? Anybody want to make a comment before I put my foot in my mouth? Yeah, please.
Part of the problem is the kids will come with an iPad in hand, ready to get online and play
Right.
Minecraft, Roblox, whatever it is they're playing. So I sort of set it up in advance and chat with the parents and say, we're going to do they're going to play football outside, or we're going to do a Lego activity, or we do screen time, but there's an actual time limit. And it actually has worked with my son when there's other kids there, versus if he's alone at home, there's the big tug of war to get off. But when the other kids kind of work together as a group, I sort of have more positive outcomes. But I think talking to the parents or the kids in advance really helps.
So thank you. So you've brought up that whole notion of us. I mean, this is really a community shared issue, okay? And it takes a lot of work. It shouldn't have to, but it does. Now, you wanted to follow that up with something?
Well, I was just going to say, as they get older though, and it's middle school,
Right.
peer pressure, and
Right.
that's where I think I don't want to lose my kids, but yet.
So parenting is all about setting expectations. And it's a continuing journey of setting expectations. So the sooner you can, the earlier you can set expectations, the earlier you have a media environment plan, and I'm way serious about this, the more you will feel like some measure of success and management. I mean, ultimately we can only control what we control, right? We can't control what happens in the other person's house. We can't control really what happens outside of our home. But you can set expectations as early as you can, and it's never too late. It can be really difficult, but it's never too late. So it does involve, and I love your thought about communicating with the other parents, and you can do that in many ways. In terms of your children coming over, and we really want to have an electronic-free time. Would you mind if your child leaves the iPad at home? I would say, I ask kids all kinds of quirky questions, right? And one of them is like, what do you like about birthday parties? And the only birthday parties, for the most part, that kids remember are the non-electronic ones. They really don't remember the electronic ones because it's the same experience all over again. That's number one. Number two, I live and breathe on this. If you feed them, they will come. So you have really great snacks, really great food. You got to have gimmicks. We need gimmicks. 3, children are not good at making their own plans. Let me reframe this. Children are not good at making their own plans. And this is all the way through middle school. Well, you know, he's in 7th grade or she's in 7th grade. They should be calling the other person. How come they're not calling the other person? A, the other person's not calling anybody else. And B, and I've thought long and hard about this, and yes, I think about my own childhood, but I've dug into history on this. When people had the neighborhood, and you go outside, people weren't calling to say, hey, I'll meet you out there in 2 minutes. They just went outside. And you play with who's ever there, and it wasn't organized. It becomes organized as part of the game. But we were never good at making plans. We're not good at making plans at that age. Children don't do that well. So to set it up as an expectation that they're going to do it is just not going to be so successful. So does that mean, and I get this in the office, I have to be in charge of making the arrangements and planning? And the answer is, if you'd like your child to become more social, to have more neutral or positive experiences and less electronic ones, yeah, you do. And one that's very sensitive, and I will just mention, but get immediately out of it. But it seems like they're coming over to my house all the time, but they're never getting invited to the other person's house. And the answer is sometimes that's true. And there may be many, many reasons for that, some of which we know, some of which we don't know. But again, you can control what's in your environment. It becomes difficult to outside yours. So yeah, it does involve a lot of activity with that. And sometimes you try and get your child to be as participatory as they can, but you don't need their permission as a parent to decide that it's going to be an electronic-free play day. I'm not asking you your permission to put away the video game. That's going to happen. Now the question is, what would you like to do with that time, right? Now, obviously, that's different come adolescence. But that's also about setting expectations so that as they become older adolescents, they're drifting into that less and less. It's not easy, and it involves the entire weed of community. All right, other thoughts, and then we can expand it to child development stuff if you'd like.
I just have a question about prior, if we have them watch it before bedtime,
Yeah.
is that too overstimulating for them before bed?
So there's a pretty strong biologic link between any electronic exposure and sleep. And that has to do, I'll keep it simple, fundamentally with 2 issues. One is the excitation of the experience, even watching a neutral show, like The Simpsons. I can't believe I'm calling The Simpsons neutral. In the day, that was really edgy. But let's just say that, right? So that's churning something, even if the child's showing no facial expression. Something's happening in there, that dopamine sort of stuff going on. But 2 is that it also reduces the release of melatonin. Melatonin is this little hormone in our brain, in one spot in the brain that's got to drift to another spot and signal to turn the sleep machinery on, so it just delays it that much further. So electronics before bed.
How long before, and what do you suggest doing instead?
You know, the science isn't rock solid on this. I suggest an hour to shut it off, an hour before, 45 minutes on the most. Because it really does take that long to settle down. Now, I say this, and I know plenty of kids that I've seen grow up that are in college, and I can fall asleep right after. And, there's exceptions to every rule. But in general, I'd say it's a good thing to do. Yes, back there, and then I'll get to you, sir. Oh, you got the mic. That's better. Sorry, you've been trumped. Oh, that's a bad time.
Talking about healthy cookies, right? Is YouTube considered a healthy cookie, right? Because
Yeah.
A lot of like the Little League instruction videos are on YouTube, and
Right.
the math lessons are on
Right.
YouTube. With moderation, is
Right.
YouTube considered okay?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm not damning the whole experience at all. YouTube's fascinating. I use YouTube therapeutically. Children that are oversensitive to school alarm bells or to the sounds of flushing toilets. So, I see a lot of children on the autism spectrum. And the echoing of public flushing toilets can really just send them in a tizzy. Do you have any idea how many YouTube videos there are of public flushing toilets? Oh my gosh.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I was just blown away. So YouTube and those other things, Google, other things have an immense opportunity to teach. And yes, everything in small amounts. Boy, that's
You gave the cookie away?
I did give the cookie away. Little bites of the unhealthy cookie are probably okay, because then you can change that and make it healthy. But after a certain point, see, I trust nothing electronically, professionally, because I can't. I can't in my own home, and I can't professionally. But in small doses, for something like that, sure. Have I learned things on YouTube? Absolutely. And continue to. So that's great. Thank you. Yeah, please.
I have a follow-up to this. Watching sports, like I myself like watching like Warriors or baseball.
Yeah.
So is that okay? Like, because the games can go 3 hours, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, too. And you're hitting me below the belt because I'm a sports fan, but I tend not to watch a lot on TV. Actually, I did. It's not about me. I did when I lived in Chicago, because in Chicago, during the winter, there are only two things we do. We watch television and we eat. And after we lived out here, I found that my time watching sports just dramatically dropped because I was outdoors. I was doing other things. That's true, all right? So, yeah, sure, that's okay, but make it a family experience. And make it a family experience. So, about 5 weeks ago in hockey, if any of you watch professional hockey, and this was all over television, there was a devastating hit that one of the players made to the referee. The referee's back was turned against the wall, and the player very directly and consciously skated over and just bashed the referee from behind. Guy could have had a concussion. Now that's going to show in front of your child. Or Odette, whatever his name is, the New York Giant that just absolutely lost it. And talk about it. See, that's the moment to talk about it. If you guys have decided you're going to watch that, or WWE, or you're going to play Grand Theft Auto, be there and talk about it. So take the unhealthy cookie and make it into a neutral or even a potentially positive learning experience. When I talk to kids in the office, because I can't do it in real time, Doc, I would never do things like this. I'm not a violent person, okay? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. But as parents, you have a tremendous opportunity to do that. So yeah, and that's really a great chance. So good, thank you. Yes. Oh no, I'm sorry, the woman in the back. I did promise you.
I was just wondering, you had mentioned like Minecraft used to be more appropriate. Are there other games that are still appropriate that do not have the same effects?
I'm the worst guy in the room to ask this. I don't know. I really don't. And it's not that Minecraft is not. But I think of Minecraft like the healthy cookie that is now partially eaten, that you can have too much of a good thing. And so when you're playing 3 hours a day of a relatively neutral game, is that so good? Is that so healthy, right? Club Penguin. You guys know Club Penguin? Somebody want to describe it really quickly?
Club Penguin is like a learning video game
Right.
website.
Learning video game website. girls play it, boys play it, younger children play it. So I just had to see what it was. So this very cute 8-year-old girl takes me over to the office computer and shows it to me. Club Penguin's fine. I'm not here to bash it. Club Penguin is about teaching you how to purchase online. The ultimate goal of Club Penguin is to purchase. That's what Club Penguin's about. Now, that's not for me to say is that healthy or unhealthy. That's for you to determine. And like we talked about with the gentleman who's talking about sports, what a great opportunity to say, okay, you're playing Club Penguin, play Club Penguin. Let's go through this a little bit together. But I can't tell you, but those websites absolutely can guide you in terms of relatively healthy games. So I would trust those websites. You got those names written down, right?
Yeah, just one more.
Yeah.
So what about the laptop programs that they start with some children in elementary school and middle school? Is that dangerous to their development, to be on there all that?
Remember I said sort of I'd be walking into the belly of the beast? You know, I'm going to talk out of all sides of my mouth. How much more time do we have?
We'll be here all night.
Well, we can go a little bit more. We're having an early flight tomorrow. What difference does it make? All right. You know, when I'm wearing my hat as a developmental specialist, I love accessible technology in all forms as long as it's valuable and useful. So I'm promoting it all the time. And Chromebooks and touch screens and Google Docs and things like that are all part of it. And for learning tools, it's great. You want to get your child to learn how to organize data, there's nothing better than inspiration as a software. That's great. So there's a tremendous opportunity that all of this electronic media has. Now, here's where I'm going to put my foot in my mouth big time. Because I haven't chased down the veracity of it. I have been told by a reputable source, a 7th grade girl with very high functioning autism, that she has the internet cafe in her middle school. Just happens to be in this school district, so let's just make it a little more sweaty for me. Now that is of significant concern to me. And I have not had the time to speak with the administrators about it, and I have learned to not be so judgmental, but to understand the factors involved. There may be good ones. But when I look at this girl and I say, okay, great, what do you do? Duh, Dr. Berman, I'm looking on the computer. And I said, you're looking with somebody else? No! So you're not talking to anybody at lunch? No! That's why they call it Internet Cafe. It's almost word for word. That's of concern to me. The content may be totally fine, but where is the social learning occurring? Now, we could have a healthy discussion at another time in another venue about defining healthy social learning on a playground, right? That's a whole nother discussion. But it sure isn't happening when there's that screen interface. Even if they're dialoguing online, that's not the same. It's certainly not the same for young children's minds. So that's when I get concerned. Yes, 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 yes. We can go about another 15 minutes.
I'm so glad you brought
I want to
that
get
up.
you home.
And I have to say that I told my son I really thought Internet Cafe was not a good way to spend his lunch.
Yeah, thank you.
And he agrees with me. But what do you do when they're supposed to be on Google Docs,
Right.
writing a paper, and they get the urge to go on some other games or some YouTubes? And what do? You can't be standing over the middle schoolers' shoulders if it's not like they're just sitting there with a pencil and a paper. What do you do?
I have only one answer for you. Stand over their shoulder. And I'm being serious. Because, see, this is about expectations. This is a big, big topic of mine, but that too is a much larger one that we're going to dialogue. It's all about expectations. Can I realistically expect developmentally that anybody is going to be sitting on the computer and not have the opportunity to drift? I'm writing now, or at least I'm trying to write. My wife made me buy a very small electronic notebook that I'm not hooking up to the internet. Because she knows that I might want to check my email. And yeah, I really forgot what Curry's score was. And I got to update the statistics, right? I mean, we're all human. We're all prone to that. That's sort of at what point does the good cookie sort of become not such a healthy cookie? So that's a setup. It's an unwitting setup. Nobody set it up that way as a setup, but it is. It's a setup for your child. It's a setup for you. Yeah, you really do have to be standing there. It's sort of like cell phones and going to bed. So here's the idea that I had mentioned earlier, and since I'm not an entrepreneur kind of guy, one of you can take it and run with it, which is to make a whole line of little boxes, like little cradles, and you can line them with satin and logos of the mortars and so on that just happen to be just the right size for smartphones. And then the smartphones stay out of the room, because I've seen some very serious conflicts that have led to therapy, and in one case to a boarding school, over just continual disagreements and arguments that escalated over and over again about control of the cell phone. Let's be very clear. A child, a middle schooler, and an adolescent is not able to control not looking on that cell phone. It's hard enough for me. I mean, look at me. I did it earlier, right? I got a text. I want to make sure it wasn't an emergency. So I tried to do it in a very clever but incredibly awkward way. We all have that. So I really don't have a good answer for you, except, yeah, I mean, it means keeping that out there public. I think rooms, by and large, no longer are good places for children to be doing their work.
We'll just take them out of the laptop program. That's what we did.
Well, and you can do that too. That's right. So you can do that, but eventually, yeah, well, right, but eventually you're going to have to face this as well. And it's about training, right? Because they're eventually going to go on, whether it's to college or work or whatever. You know, there's an estimate of, I don't know, several $1 billion a year, per year, of lost gross national product potential because of people being on the internet and not on their work. So it's about setting expectations, and you just have to be on their shoulders. I wish I had an easier answer. Yes, you can say.
Should we ban Facebook?
Pardon?
Should we ban Facebook? And
Well, I'm not getting to that one.
So my question
Thank you.
more around like what people are like, because the school has introduced them to all these things like their projects on this internet, and is there a way we can like make it more efficient how they use it, even though it's for school? Because I mean, we cannot take it away, like we cannot take the screen time away, and they tend to be there all the time because they are doing their work. So how can we make that, make more efficient, but also not like have a negative impact on their grades or like by limiting the screen time? And is there something how do you find, like, how can you leverage on those things, like, find out what might be good for them, or how they can use it in a better and efficient way?
Well, that means having a communication with your school, with teachers at the school. It means doing your own investigative work in terms of ways to be more efficient. I don't know how to answer that from a specific technological point of view. But everybody needs breaks. And again, even the healthy cookie can be overeaten. And there's a difference between effectiveness and efficiency. Those are not the same things. So think of it not so much in terms of efficiency, but in terms of effectiveness. Sometimes slower thinking off the screen ultimately leads to a better outcome or a better product. That's really hard to sell. It's very hard to sell because education is just constantly about time, speed. It means taking some risks, taking little risks and trying and seeing to just do it a different way. You're not going to make a mistake. It may not be effective, but you're not going to make a mistake.
And what about programming? Like these days, they are introducing programming at a very younger age. Is that a good thing, or is that
I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a thing. And some people are really great at programming. But at age 12 or 14, are they ready to program 16 hours a day or 12 hours a day? Gee, I don't think so. Just like, and there's a societal bias on this one, people would not be so concerned if they had a daughter or a son spending 4 hours a day on an athletic activity because they're really, really good at it. until they get to a point where either they're starting to burn out or the level of expectations has gone from 4 hours to 6 hours to 8 hours and so on. So again, it's all about sort of looking at what you think of as healthy and not healthy. You know, most of these can be neutral experiences. We have time for one last question.
I had a question about the positive effects of co-play, essentially,
Great.
in terms of electronic media.
Thank you.
What has been sort of research or seen that, so for example, I see like when my son plays Minecraft with somebody else in the same universe at the same time together, it seems to have certain positive effects as well.
Thank you. It's a great way to end. So, you know, the experience doesn't have to be so negative. And there is some research, and I mentioned it in that little paper that you got, that in non-aggressive settings, and in this case we'll say Minecraft's not aggressive, you can see pro-social, positive sharing, cooperation, problem solving. And that definitely is. Now the question is, can you take that, which can be very positive, very growth promoting, and have it translate to other experiences? And nobody knows the research on that one per se. But the answer is possibly yes. So again, that's an example of making it into a healthy cooking. I think that's a marvelous example. Now, would you want them to do it 5 hours in a day? Exactly. But I also don't think that you want them to, well, I'll just leave it at that. So it's a matter of balance in finding that. There are not necessarily clear, in fact, there are not clear answers to this. The idea is to learn more, talk to your neighbors, talk to your community, and begin to establish what you feel are appropriate health messagings in your own family. So, with that in mind, thank you all very much.